I am delighted to be here. Assalamu alaikum, Pax Domini Vobiscum, peace be with all of you. First of all, I would like to introduce my dear friend, Huston Smith. Professor Huston Smith will say a few words first.
I have a pretty good projection voice. Do I need a microphone? What shall I do? I'm already wired. Well, my instructions were to welcome you. And here we are, deep into the afternoon program. Well, welcome. And welcome, friend.
My life flows on in endless song. Above earth's lamentation, I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails the new creation. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing?
I'm Bill Moyers. When it comes to the comparative study of religion, Huston Smith literally wrote the book. The World's Religions, or The Religion of Man as it was once titled, has been a perennial bestseller for decades and a staple of introduction to religion courses. I remember reading it when I was a young seminarian almost 50 years ago. Few books have so informed my life in government, publishing, and journalism. Huston Smith opened my mind to the power of religion in cultures the world over and their impact on human events.
Huston Smith was born in 1919 in rural China to missionary parents. His family was very well respected and lived their Christian religious beliefs, helping the poor and teaching by example. In all his explorations of the world's religions, Huston never had cause to give up his bedrock Christian roots.
When I came to this country, at first I thought I was going right back as a missionary.
How old were you then?
I was 17, and my only American male role model was my father. And so I grew up assuming that missionaries were what American boys grew up to be. But I was totally unprepared for the dynamism of the West. Never mind that it was Central Methodist College, enrollment 600, in Fayette, Missouri, population 3,000. Compared with Podunk, China, it was the big time and the bright lights, and by 2 weeks, China had faded into a happy memory. I wasn't going to squander my life in the backwaters of rural China. But I just moved over across the street, so to speak, and I'd be a minister. Then something happened in my junior year, and I ended trying to get out of as many organizations as I could in order to focus on my studies.
Why? What happened?
Well, what happened was there was a little discussion group that the philosophy professor organized, and once a month, he would have us over and we would discuss a philosophical issue. I suppose it must have been mounting in me all evening. As we walked back to our dormitory, a little cluster of us, 4 or 5, stood in the dorm hall until after midnight, just hammer and tong, talking about these as unlikely a group of peripatetics as you would find anywhere. But it kept on going as I went alone to my room until, I don't know when, maybe around 1 or 2 o'clock, it just like my mind detonated, demolishing mental stockades. And it was almost like a mystical experience. Like ideas were almost visible. The Platonic form were out there. You could almost touch it. And just receding from me endlessly. I wonder if I slept at all that night. But that was a changing point. And after that, why, never mind the organization, to focus on this. And that has stayed in play. That has been, the life-giving lure.
Houston attended graduate school at the University of Chicago under the direction of noted religious thinker Henry Nelson Wyman, who was instrumental in shaping thinking about religious naturalism. He wrote, "It's impossible to gain knowledge of the total cosmos or to have any understanding of the infinity transcending the cosmos. Consequently, beliefs about these matters are illusions, cherished for their utility in producing desired states of mind." During this time in Chicago, Houston met Wyman's daughter, Eleanor, now Kendra. They were married in 1943. Karen, the first of 3 daughters, was born in 1944, followed by Gail in 1947 and Kim in 1949. While doing research for his doctoral thesis, Houston was looking for books on the subject of pain and happened to run across Gerald Heard's book, Pain, Sex, and Time. Being the most interesting title of the books in hand, Houston read the whole night through. Heard opened Houston's mind to the idea of the transcendental. Houston found something so profound in Heard's writing that he made a vow not to read anything else by him until he finished his PhD. But once his union card was in hand, he would read everything by him. In 1944, after getting his PhD, Houston accepted a teaching position in Denver at the University of Colorado. In 1947, Houston accepted a teaching position at Washington University in St. Louis. But before moving further east, Houston decided to get in touch with Gerald Heard. Through Heard's publisher, he got an address at Trabuco Canyon in Southern California. Gerald Heard and Aldous Huxley had traveled from England before the war to Hollywood and studied under Swami Satprakashananda, the founder of the Vedanta Society of Southern California. They were soon joined by Christopher Isherwood. Gerald wanted to experiment with monastic living and raise funds to build Trabuco College. Huxley spent a good deal of time there as well, including a 6-week stretch while working on the perennial philosophy. Later, Heard would donate the grounds and building to the Vedanta Society. Houston hitchhiked to Trabuco and hit it off with Heard, who asked him if he would care to meet Aldous Huxley. Houston was eager to do so. Before leaving Southern California, Houston met with Maria and Aldous Huxley at their desert retreat. Later, Houston would describe the simple pleasures of sweeping the floors with Maria and walking into the desert with Aldous, discussing the Desert Fathers and the nature of reality. It was suggested by Heard that once Houston settled in St. Louis, he should look up Swami Satprakashananda. At first, Houston found it a little exotic, a Swami in orange robes and Hindu trappings, but on his way out he buys a copy of the Upanishads and for the second time of his life stayed up all night reading. What struck him was that so much truth was packed into so few words. At Washington University, the dean has decided that the school should broaden its outlook to include courses that would give students a perspective on the world. Since World War II, a broader worldview would perhaps help the cause of world peace. Since Houston is the new man in the philosophy department, he is given the assignment. This is the genesis of Houston's Religion of Man, later to be retitled The World's Religions. Much of the material for the chapter on Hinduism came from the 10-year association between Houston and Swami Satprakashananda. Huston had said of him that he had met scholars and he had met holy men, but never before had he met both in the same person.
He found himself once again on the verge of two traditions, Christianity and Hinduism, as he submitted to weekly tutorials with the renowned scholar Swami Satprakashananda.
There was a moment in St. Louis a few years where I had a dual role. I was listed as associate minister at the Methodist Church nearby and was president of the Vedanta Society of St. Louis, which was teaching me metaphysical profundities that my church certainly was not preaching. That this all came to a head on Christmas Eve, because there would be a 4 o'clock Christmas service at the church, which would be a family affair in the afternoon so the children could come. And that was wonderful. Christmas music, silent night, all of that, all of the magic of Christmas and being together with our children was just glorious. But then we would go home, have a supper, put the children to bed early for their early rising, and then I would slip off to the Vedanta Society, where every Christmas Eve, Swami Satprakashananda, he never varied his title, was Jesus Christ, the light of the world. And even though in the Methodist Church there was all the happiness of the family togetherness, when it came to spiritual depth, what he said, the Swami said about the incarnation, fed my soul more than any Christmas sermon in the Methodist Church. The reason? The Swami literally believed in the incarnation, that God had metaphysically become a human being. Now you see, I'm a living witness to the fact that I have drawn spiritual succor from an alien tradition, which, however, was true to the metaphysical teachings of original Christianity more than my church, which had been diluted by modernism.
Huston and Kendra were among the founding members of the St. Louis chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, which carried out sustained nonviolent campaigns from 1947 to 1957, which were among the earliest in the nation to end racial segregation in public accommodations. Kendra participated in lunch counter sit-ins, and Huston brought Martin Luther King to speak at the still segregated Washington University and worked within the administration to fully desegregate.
Huston had tremendous contribution to the Vedanta Society of St. Louis. He was the president of our society. He brought his students from the Washington University to Swami Satprakashananda and introduced them with the Swami. Then in 1951, Swami Satprakashananda wanted to buy a house. And there was a little racial prejudice in that area at that time. The owner of the house did not want to sell the house to Swami. So the present house was bought in Huston and his wife Kendra's name. Then Huston transferred that property to the Vedanta Society.
In 1955, Huston's lecture series on the world's religions is televised through National Educational Television, NET, the predecessor of PBS, which gave many Americans their first exposure to Zen, Vedanta, and Islam.
We're going to talk tonight about the yogas. Now, this is a very strange word to us. In fact, I find myself smiling in a Western context whenever I turn to this word, because, well, we associate it with the bizarre, the fantastic, the occult, maybe even the fraudulent a little bit, the fakers. This is where we come to the famous yoga position, and I want to just show you what this is. There's always a little humor involved in this because it's so strange to us. But nevertheless, I think we ought to know what this is. They say the most effective position which will still the mind is the so-called yoga, the lotus posture. It doesn't go very well with shoes, which is why I've taken mine off. Actually, it doesn't go very well with trousers either, but we'll forget about that tonight. You put one foot up here in the lap, then all you have to do is to bring the other foot around like that. The spine must be completely straight. Now they say when you get used to this, the point is that this will put your mind at rest and keep out the bodily distractions better.
The lecture series became the book, which is first published in 1958 and has since sold millions of copies. Huston's TV series and books have introduced Vedanta to millions of Americans, including householders, monks, and nuns of the Ramakrishna order.
There's two ways of meeting Huston. There's one way through his books, and there's the other way of meeting Huston, which is through meeting Huston and actually being with Huston and experiencing the joy of being with Huston. I'd already met Huston through the books before I met the human being Huston. And I was very impressed by the books. I think a lot of us were deeply moved by that Religions of Man, what later became the world's religions. First of all, he can write. Second of all, there was something coming from the inside which was very different from other books that I'd read on religious studies. What particularly impressed me was meeting him and seeing that tie in. Because you had a man who was a person who was obviously a practitioner, who was coming from his experience as a scholar from the inside out, not from the outside in. So you had the feeling of total, even more than sympathy. It was a deep empathy which carried through. And it makes a huge difference when you read something to have that sense of it being an experiential.
Professor Smith said, when I first started reading in Buddhism, particularly Daisetsu Suzuki and others, I determined that I really wanted that Satori experience. Whatever it was, he said, I determined I had to have it. And he said, my friends told me that I was whoring after enlightenment. And he said, perhaps I was, but I knew I really wanted that experience. So I sat for a long time at Myo Shinji, and Myo Shinji means the monastery of the wonderful mind, the wondrous mind. The abbot at the time, first thing he did was put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, oh, kind of bony. He said, well, we'll be careful. And I thought, that's ominous, but I didn't know what it meant. So I found out later that if you're sitting in the hall and you nod, if your head drops or if you get drowsy, they will encourage you with the stick. And there's a very formal way to do it. The jikijitsu, the monk who has the stick, will touch you on the shoulder from behind, and you're facing the wall. And you will put your palms together, do a gasho from your seat, and then lean your head to the left, and the monk will take a full swing, kind of like an overhead serve with a tennis racket, and smash down. And as Professor Smith was describing this, clearly he was reliving this experience, because he said, well, I nodded my head and I felt a tap on my shoulder. And he went on to say, I put my palms together, I knew what to do, and I leaned my head to the left, and he said, and then that monk with this piece of lumber in his hands reached back extra hard and came down with all his strength on my body. And he said, it wasn't so much excruciating, it was paralyzing. He missed my connecting tissue and hit me right on the shoulder blade. And the monk was very embarrassed that he missed. Now, it could be that Professor Smith was so skinny that there wasn't much area to hit, but at any rate, it was bad form to hit the bone and to actually contact your skeleton.
In 1958, Huston accepted a position at MIT and moved his family to Boston. In 1960, Huston is given a budget to bring a guest lecturer for a semester and calls on his friend Aldous Huxley. This creates a sensation. The lecture series is wildly successful, creating traffic problems throughout the Boston area and an overflow-packed hall. Huxley suggests that Huston should contact Harvard professors Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who are doing research on the effects of psychedelic drugs on human consciousness, which might hold religious significance.
The point that interests me is that whereas the ordinary, everyday experience is, of course, absolutely essential most of the time, it's not the only possible experience. There are also other types of consciousness, I mean, the artist type, the mystics type, and so on, which have empirically an enormous value and may help people to live less self-centered and more charitable lives and more understanding lives.
In 1962, Smith participated in what would later be called the Good Friday experiments, meant to induce mystical experiences through religious settings while under the influence of LSD, mescaline, and psilocybin. At the time, these drugs were not only legal, but considered quite legitimate research subject. In 1967, while traveling in Tibet, Huston makes what he calls the single most important empirical discovery of his career. While listening to the Tibetan monks chanting, he hears and recognizes that each monk is producing multiphonic chords from their voices. Huston records them, and then back at MIT has acoustic scientists confirm his findings. The music of Tibet is introduced to the West. The recording is still in print, now on CD, and the monks perform in concert through the generous efforts of Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead and others. In 1973, Huston accepted a position at Syracuse University. While there, he came to realize that he had left out Native American religions from his great book.
In my formal education of religion, I say that with a wry smile, was taught that they were primitive, with the pejorative built solidly into that word. And therefore, no reason to pay any attention to them except for historical reason, what the old people felt way back in the childhood of the human race. I would have gone out my life in that mode if I hadn't moved to Syracuse, where providentially I was moving into the shade of the Onondaga Reservation, and that 10 years that I was there absolutely transformed my view of the indigenous religion, and I am so grateful. I will not go to my grave not having entered a final chapter in the second edition of my book.
Huston also became involved with the case to legalize peyote for Native American religious ritual. A decade-long struggle finally succeeded in recognizing the right to practice the religious traditions of the Native Americans. During Huston's career, he interviewed some of the most well-known and influential religious and intellectual leaders in the U.S. and around the world, including D.T. Suzuki, Krishnamurti, Eleanor Roosevelt, John Kenneth Galbraith, Margaret Mead, Reinhold Niebuhr, and Paul Tillich, to name a few. He also helped bring his friend, the Dalai Lama, to the U.S. for the first time. In 1996, Bill Moyers devoted a 5-part PBS series, The Wisdom of Faith with Huston Smith, a documentary of his life and work and a review of the religions of the world.
What do you make of that Hindu proverb, there are realms of gold hidden in the depths of our hearts?
In the Upanishads, the philosophical versions and texts of Hinduism, there is a phrase that comes repeatedly like the clang of a gong. It's tat tvam asi, literally, that thou art. And what it means is that which we seek in Brahman, the divine, whatever you call it, is right here within you. You see, they begin by saying you can have what you want, and that sounds very good, but wait till you get to the climax, and then you've already got it.
When we see Huston in the Bill Moyers interviews, we see him at his apex. He was in his mid-70s. Now we meet Huston in his 90s. He suffered progressive hearing loss, osteoporosis, macular degeneration, and slowing memory and organizational skills. In his mid-80s, he opted to get a cochlear implant operation, and he compensated for his memory loss by setting up a successful system of notes and papers to keep himself communicating and working. He said that correspondence that came in went in a pile and he dealt with them in order. Nobody jumped the line. Huston gave hundreds of interviews in his later years.
I believe that the fundamental faith of all the authentic religions is it all makes sense. There is an analogy used frequently that we're asked to visualize a wonderful tapestry hanging wall, ceiling to floor in a museum. Our problem, the human problem, is we are looking at the tapestry from the wrong side. And you know what that's like. I mean, bits and snippets of yarn and so on cut off. It makes no sense at all. And then the point of religion is to take us by the hand and lead us from looking at the backside to the front, where it's a great work of art.
In this interview, we set about to upset what had become Huston's well-worn pattern of the usual questions and memorized answers. The interviewer, Ken Dykewald, is a noted gerontologist. Huston surprised us all by launching into an unprompted lecture explaining how the 3 great enduring cultures, China, India, and the West, have dealt with aging. Before the cameras were even ready, he set the terms of the subject to be discussed.
Everywhere that human beings have lived, whenever they have lived, always they've been faced with 3 inescapable problems. 1, how to earn their livelihood from the soil. 2nd, how to get along with their fellow human being. And 3rd, how to get along with themselves. Now it so happens that the great enduring civilizations are also 3 in number. East Asia, China for short, South Asia, India for short, and the West. Now, my thesis is that in their great historical developments, these 3 civilizations have poured more of their attention into one of these problems, but differently. India, the world psychologist, took as its distinctive point psychologically, they divided life into 4 stages. Youth, maturity, where you pour your energies into profession and family and social obligations, and then retirement is the 3rd stage. In the classic literature, it's called you become a forest dweller. That means you poured a lot of energy into family and to society, but it's time to retire. You're entitled to retire. And forest dweller, you go off alone. And there, in that stage, your prime responsibility is to think through the meaning of life so that there will be some understanding of this human venture before it's all over. That's retirement. And I'll just sandwich in how different that is from us. For us, retirement means sort of R&R. Now, not so for them. You've got the responsibility to understand what life is all about. And then the final stage is, a technical word is renunciation. You renounce even this privacy, this solitude to think these through. You come back into the world to put into practice what you have figured out.
As long as he was physically able, Huston attended the annual Memorial Day retreat in Olima, hosted by the Vedanta Society of Northern California. Huston's North Campus home in Berkeley was nice but humble. For years, Huston and Kendra sponsored a multi-generational Tibetan refugee family. They lived in a detached, converted garage apartment. This family proved to be a great blessing for Huston and Kendra as Huston's health declined. As Huston's physical condition weakened, the Tibetan family moved into the main house to care for him. At that point, there were 3 generations in the family, including a toddler and 2 rescue dogs. The family slept upstairs in what used to be Huston's bedroom and office. Huston slept in the downstairs bedroom, confining himself to the ground level, and Kendra slept in the garage apartment. During this time, he worked on his official biography and a personal memoir, his co-authors helping to compensate for Huston's diminishing abilities. He was not ready to give up, which made his extended hospice period so intriguing. When people came to visit, Huston knew who they were and would rise to the occasion. When we visited, he spoke about Swami Satprakashananda and how much Swami had meant to him. Similarly, when Swami Chaitanya visited, he again talked about Satprakashananda. He was in hospice, at times at death's door, for a total of 2 years and 8 months. We can only guess at what was going on inside. Huston died on December 30th, 2016. A service was held at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco on April 1st, 2017.
welcome to everyone who is gathered to honor the ever-alive spirit of Huston Smith.
In his 80s, Huston told me that he and Kendra had solemnly agreed to new ground rules for him. No more than 1 local talk per week, no more than 2 out-of-towners per month, and no more than 2 international talks per year. In his last couple of years, Huston was confined to bed. You'd expect some world weariness, but whenever I visited him, as if bemused by his condition, he would begin by singing, "Don't get around much anymore." And lately, during a visit when he had barely enough strength left to speak, he began to recite from memory the Edna St. Vincent Millay poem, God's World. Slowly and with great feeling, he found these lines. "O world, I cannot hold thee close enough. Thy winds, thy wide gray skies, thy woods this autumn day that all but cry with color. Lord, I do fear you have made the world too beautiful this year." So many of us here today found someone we were looking for when we found Huston. Our lives, it seems, had somehow disclosed to us the reality of the sacred, and we wanted to know more. Because we sought knowledge, we were looking for scholars. With a doctorate in philosophy from Chicago at age 25, Huston qualified. Because we were students, we were looking for teachers, and Huston was a gifted one, made sharper still by his early embrace of the rigors of television. Because we were readers, we were looking for writers, and Huston loved to write. He sometimes said his favorite way to pray was with a pencil in his hand. Eventually, there were 14 books and over 100 articles. Because some of us had encountered entheogens, we were delighted to find someone who was soberly sympathetic. In 1964, Huston published Do Drugs Have Religious Import?, the most anthologized piece ever to appear in that journal's history, reprinted in 14 books. Because we had been born into a globalizing world, we were looking for a universalist who found it unthinkable that the infinite could privilege any particular culture or institution. Long before I was a perennialist, Huston once said, I was a universalist. And because we were hungry for authenticity, we were looking for someone who laid himself open to traditional methods of attunement to the ground of being, as Huston did. All this would have been quite enough, but the wonder that was Huston also came wrapped, as George Hart once put it, in an incomparable combination of personal warmth, infectious humor, exceptional clarity, and unobtrusive but palpable spirituality. It is no wonder then that when we did find Huston, whenever and wherever we found him, we leaned toward him like plants toward sunlight.
My other and final comment is, someone once asked Mahatma Gandhi, wouldn't it be wonderful if goodness were as contagious as the common cold? And he answered, when will we ever learn that goodness is as contagious as the common cold? So I'm going to leave this day a better person. The goodness of His holiness, and all of us who are joined together in the noble task, because I've caught the contagious from you and from all of you.
Because Huston was profoundly deaf, he couldn't hear the thunderous standing ovation he was receiving. Like Beethoven, he had to be turned to face the audience.
Through all the tumult and the strife, those freedom bells come ringing, since love is Lord of heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing?